Have you ever had a horrible worship rehearsal? You know the one I'm talking about where the AC at the church was broken and it's like 90 degrees in your church and the drummer can't stay on time and everybody shows up late and there's a hum in the sound system, and when you go to plug in your guitar, you take your hands off your guitar for a second and the strap falls off your guitar and the guitar comes crashing to the ground. You know the kind of worship rehearsal I'm talking about. I'm sure you've had at least one in your life where things just go horrible. So in this video, I want to share with you 5 things to do when your worship rehearsal goes wrong. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com. This is the place where we talk about how to lead yourself well, lead your church well, and lead worship well. So if you're interested in that, click subscribe down below and let's get into it, because today we're talking about worship rehearsals and what to do when things go wrong. I'm sure you've had a worship rehearsal or 2 or 7 in your life that haven't gone so well. Something happened and it just didn't feel like things were going the way that they were supposed to go. I'm sure you've had that in your worship ministry before. And so what can you do? Do you just get frustrated and yell at your worship team? Do you just say, that's it, we're done, and you quit and go home and you show up on Sunday and lead the songs anyways? What do you do when things go wrong in your worship rehearsal? Well, I'm going to share with you 5 things that I think you can do to redeem your time at your worship rehearsal. But before we get into that, I want to hear from you. What is the worst worship rehearsal you've ever had? Share your horror stories down below. I'll talk to you in a second. Thanks so much for leaving your answer down below. Let's get into 5 things you can do to redeem a worship rehearsal that has gone terribly wrong. The first thing to do when your worship rehearsal is going wrong is the most obvious, but we don't do it. Stop and pray. The more or the longer I'm in ministry, not even just that I'm in ministry, the longer I've been a Christian, the more I've recognized the power of prayer. I believe that prayer has the power to change things, but more importantly, it has the power to change us. And so, if things are going horribly wrong at our worship rehearsal, what if you just stopped and said to your team, you actually recognized that things were going horribly wrong, and you said, guys, I feel like we just need to stop for a second and pray. And in that moment, what you're doing is, number 1, prayer has the power to change things. Number 2, prayer has the power to change you. It changes the way that you're viewing things. It's changing your heart in that moment. And maybe if there was tension in your worship team before, maybe that tension is going to subside as people start to realize why they're there in the first place. And then number 3, you're showing that you're submitting to God's will, and God is going to bring about his glory through whatever situation you find yourself in. So if you recognize that, then you can redeem your worship rehearsal and say, God, I know that things are going horribly right now. The AC is not working. The sound system isn't working, but you are still good. You are still worthy of us gathering as a team to prepare to lead your church in worship, which is a high calling, a huge privilege. So God, even though things aren't going well right now, we thank you for the opportunity to lead your people in worship. What if that was your prayer when things went wrong, instead of just yelling at the bass player who can't hit the right notes, right? No, stop and pray. Prayer has the power to change things. Prayer has the power to change us. The second thing you can do to redeem a worship rehearsal that's going horribly wrong is to have a system in place for your worship rehearsals. Whenever you don't know what you're actually supposed to be doing whenever you gather for your worship rehearsal, then when a problem comes up, you're like, this just threw a wrench in the plans, and I have no idea what I'm supposed to do now. But if you have an idea of what your worship rehearsals look like before you even show up, then if something goes wrong in one piece, you still know what you're trying to accomplish with that piece, and you can move forward in it until you get to the next piece, which will allow you to accomplish whatever you're trying to accomplish with that piece. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about having an actual plan for your worship rehearsal, I've got a sample worship rehearsal plan, or a blueprint, down in the description below. It's called the Worship Rehearsal Blueprint, where I walk you through the 5 essential pieces of a worship rehearsal that will help you lead your team musically, spiritually, relationally, and lead them well so that they can lead your church well. So check that out in the description below. But once you have that plan, that's going to guide you when those small things go wrong. When you don't have a plan and some small thing comes up, it like completely derails you. But if you have an idea of where you're going and what you're doing, then that small thing, you can just skip over it and be like, okay, that stunk. I don't want to deal with that again, but at least I know where I'm headed with my worship rehearsal. So have a plan for your worship rehearsal, and when a problem pops up, you'll still know what you need to do during that time. The third thing you need to do when things go wrong at your worship rehearsal is, once you've stopped and prayed, and now that you have a system in place, push through. You've stopped and prayed, you've surrendered it to God, you know that you have a good system in place because you've downloaded the worship team rehearsal blueprint that I have down in the description below. Then you simply follow that. You push through and say, maybe in this moment I don't feel like things are great, but I've thought about it in the past, and I know, and I've planned what I need to do to be successful on Sunday morning, so I'm simply going to push through. You know, there are 52 weeks in a year. And if you practice every week with your worship team, you're going to have some bad rehearsals, right? Not every rehearsal is going to go perfectly. And so what separates a great worship team leader from a just okay worship team leader is that the great worship team leaders recognize that there are going to be things that pop up along the path of leading a worship team that aren't comfortable and they're difficult, but you push through them anyway. So just push through. You've got the plan in place. You know what you need to do. Maybe it's not going as smoothly as it normally does, but push through. And I guarantee that you will benefit from your obedience and your diligence when you step in front of your church to lead on Sunday morning. The fourth thing, when things don't go correctly, perfectly at your worship rehearsal, is to don't beat yourself up. Like I said, just because you have a one-time worship rehearsal where things go poorly, that's part of being in ministry. That's part of doing anything, right? There's going to be certain mountaintop experiences where things are perfect and valley experiences where things don't go well. That's just part of living life. And so don't beat yourself up. We're going to expand on that a little bit more in this next part, but I just want you to know that just because something goes wrong in your worship rehearsal, it doesn't mean you're some horrible leader. Sometimes things just go wrong, right? So don't beat yourself up. Give yourself some grace and continue on to the next week. And I bet the next week, if you just had the worst worship rehearsal you've ever had, then chances are the next worship rehearsal next week is going to be better, right? That's just statistics. So don't beat yourself up. Give yourself some grace. Let's move on to number 5. And finally, number 5, while you shouldn't beat yourself up and think that you're some horrible worship leader, number 5, make sure that this is an isolated incident and not a recurring event. If you've had the worst worship rehearsal that you've ever had for the past 5 weeks in a row, then maybe you need to consider changing some things. Maybe you need to consider the structures of your worship team, or maybe you've had the worst worship team rehearsal you've ever had for the past 2 months in a row, right? If that's you, and you're like, these have been bad, and these first 4 tips that Spencer gave me don't feel like they're really going to help, maybe it is a deeper problem. And think about, what do I need to change? Like, what specifically is going wrong, and what do I need to change? Maybe people aren't prepared to run through the songs, and you just spend forever for people trying to figure out their parts. Well, the solution would be, number 1, Get them what they need earlier so that they can prepare. Get them the chord sheets and the songs so that they can prepare earlier. And then number two, hold them to the expectation of preparation. And if they aren't prepared, then they probably aren't prepared to lead on Sunday either. So think about, is this just a one-time event? If it is, it's fine. You're going to have those in your worship team leading ministry. But if it happens like every single week, think about the structure and think about how you need to restructure your ministry so that you stop having these horrible worship rehearsals. There they were, the 5 ways to redeem a worship rehearsal that's gone terribly wrong. If you don't want to have a worship rehearsal that goes terribly wrong, or you want to minimize that chance, make sure you check out in the description below the free PDF I put together called the Worship Rehearsal Blueprint, where I will show you how to have a perfect worship rehearsal that leads your team musically, spiritually, and relationally every single time. And if things do go wrong within the context of that blueprint, you have a plan that you can push through and get to the other side and know that you've accomplished all the things that you need to accomplish. So check that out in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.